Solar is booming in Alberta. We're seeing the biggest project in Canada being built here in Alberta. Our company keeps growing and growing, but last year we installed as much solar as we installed in the previous 19 years. This year we'll install as much solar as we've installed in the previous 20 years. And if all goes well, next year we'll install more solar than we've installed in our company's history.
Hi, I'm David Dodge. Welcome to Green Energy Futures. David Kelly always had faith in solar, even when the economics were horrible and the best prospects were to create a niche business at best. But his faith was based on the simple principle that the sun is the ultimate renewable energy resource, and the fact that virtually unlimited solar energy lands on Earth every day. All we need to do is capture it. Solar is booming today, but it certainly wasn't booming when David Kelly started SkyFire Energy 20 years ago.
I have always had a little bit of an interest in solar. My grandfather built a solar pool heater probably 45 years ago and was just amazed at the power of the sun.
David Kelly started SkyFire Energy in the early days of solar. 20 years ago, when prices were high, the market was tiny, and the prospects romantic at best. But he always had faith in the industry.
I thought there was a huge future in it. It was probably 15 years too early, but it allowed us to grow as a company and learn a lot and be prepared for what is now a solar boom in Alberta.
In those early days, solar thermal was all the rage, and SkyFire focused on installing solar thermal modules that use the sun to heat liquids circulating through the panels to produce hot water.
I was doing a lot of solar hot water. I don't know if you remember the Drake Landing project. We installed all of the solar hot water systems on the homes back in the early days. Solar hot water was about 90% of our business. We were doing the occasional grid tie system, a little bit of off-grid cabins and cottages, and we probably put in a few hundred solar hot water systems in Alberta on top of the Drake Landing project. As solar module prices fell, the solar thermal market or the solar hot water market just fell off a cliff.
So Kelly switched to solar PV modules. The typical blue and black ones that produce electricity.
Because the solar electric was so much simpler, it was easier to install, required virtually no maintenance, and the economics were far better. And we don't see any solar hot water happening anymore in cold climates. It's still happening in non-freezing climates, but we see very little up here.
That was the first tipping point. Although the price of solar PV had come down, it was still fairly expensive.
We were doing the occasional grid tie system, a little bit of off-grid cabins and cottages. It was challenging. It was sort of that green bleeding edge of people that were doing it just because they wanted solar. They thought it was cool. It was, the green techno geeks. That was where we saw the market in the early days.
Ironically, one of the key customers in the early days of solar was the oil industry.
In the early days, the oil patch was a customer for solar because it was the cheapest way to get energy to a remote site with no power lines. Today, oil companies and pipeline companies are building solar because it's the cheapest way to get energy.
Then, in the late 2000s, confidence in solar was increasing, as was the scale of the projects.
We started to see larger projects happening. Our first large-scale project was a 259 kilowatt project on the Okanagan College Center of Excellence, which is now the Jim Pattison Center of Excellence in Penticton. And that was a bit of a turning point for us, being able to win a bid like that and deliver a larger scale system.
As with most things, one factor that really started the solar energy revolution around the world comes down to one thing.
Price. That was the big thing. The price of solar modules, and in Alberta it was the Microgeneration Act. Prior to that, a lot of wire owners and utilities wouldn't allow you to sell back into the grid. So you're either off grid or you didn't have solar. So Microgeneration Act allowed us to put in a system with no batteries, sell back to the grid, and the economics were horrible at the beginning.
Kelly's home province in Alberta in Canada implemented the Microgeneration Act, which allowed small producers to sell excess solar to the grid, another major tipping point in the solar revolution. Armed with declining solar prices and the ability to exchange electricity with the grid, SkyFire Energy landed a project that signaled a new era for solar in Alberta and Canada.
The Green Acres project was a 2 megawatt ground mount. Nobody had built anything like that in Alberta at the time. It was on a Hutterite colony. They have a far look ahead into their future. They're growing their own food. They're growing, crops and animals, and now they're growing their own energy, which was really cool. The economics worked at that scale, and they built a fairly large-scale project. So that project, built without subsidies, was able to deliver energy cheaper than they were getting it from the grid. And so it was that whole cost thing. And that was really what drove it.
The project was the largest in Western Canada at the time, but the thing that sent ripples through the industry was the fact that the project was unsubsidized. In that same era, SkyFire ventured into the neighboring province of British Columbia to build the Sun Mine Solar Project, a 1 megawatt project on a reclaimed mountain mine site near Kimberley, BC.
So that was the first utility scale project in British Columbia. It was a dual axis tracker, which was a challenging build on a rocky, sloped, contaminated hillside. So we had a lot of challenges to build that project.
That project was the largest in BC and the largest solar project using solar trackers in Canada at the time. The levelized cost of solar fell from 35.9 cents per kilowatt hour in 2009 to just 4 cents in 2019. And today, it's the cheapest way to generate electricity in the world. SkyFire has always been a leader in pushing the envelope on solar. And a few years ago, they began working with Jaimin Built, an Alberta home builder, to install solar on every single home they build.
In Alberta, they build in Calgary and Edmonton. They were the founders of Built Green, have always been sort of at the leading edge of green building in the province. 3 years ago, we were approached by them to start looking at solar for every single home they built. It was a huge project. We've built over 1,700 homes for Jaimin Built. We've installed 3.45 megawatts of solar, and we're offsetting 4,700 tons of CO2 a year so far. It's a big leap for a home builder.
What began as a niche business, building small off-grid solar systems on cabins and small remote systems for the oil industry, has now come full circle.
We just completed this year a 13.7 megawatt DC, 10.5 megawatt AC project for Enbridge. It's a project that they're going to use the energy to offset their energy consumption for pipelines, pumping and compressing. And that was our first, distribution connected utility scale project down in the Burdett area between Taber and Medicine Hat.
The key tipping points, as Kelly sees it, were price, policies that allowed solar owners to sell to the grid, and proof that solar works without subsidies. Alberta may not be the friendliest place to the solar industry, but the deregulated electricity market and the microgeneration policy were actually quite visionary. Today, solar companies are gravitating to Alberta.
And we're seeing that happen today. Unsubsidized projects like the Green Gate, 465 megawatts, absolutely massive project, unsubsidized, and being able to deliver energy, to Amazon and the Alberta grid cheaper than you can buy it from the Alberta grid.
Capstone Infrastructure completed the largest solar project in Canadian history last year when it commissioned the Claresholm 132 megawatt project. At 465 megawatts, the Traverse project is 350% larger and is being built by Greengate Power, a small renewable energy company with a big vision out of Calgary, Alberta. They're partners with Copenhagen Infrastructure out of Europe. As for David Kelly and SkyFire Energy, his initial faith in solar some 20 years ago paid off handsomely.
It was probably 15 years too early, but it allowed us to grow as a company and learn a lot and be prepared for what is now a solar boom in Alberta. And it just grew and grew, took over my life, and we're now 92 people. So it's grown quite a bit. We have 4 offices, Regina, Calgary, Edmonton, and Penticton. And it's an amazing story for energy in Alberta.
SkyFire's done thousands of solar projects and has led the way by breaking new ground every step of the way. So how bright is the future of solar?
Last year we installed as much solar as we installed in the previous 19 years. This year we'll install as much solar as we've installed in the previous 20 years. And if all goes well, next year we'll install more solar than we've installed in our company's history.
There are more than 150 solar companies in Alberta today, and billions in investment. At Green Energy Futures, we seek out stories involving visionary leaders, and we zero in on stories that represent key points in the renewable energy revolution. Ironically, we've done numerous stories on SkyFire Energy projects, but never on the man and the company. That is until now. We've produced 300 stories across Canada. If you like our stories, please subscribe and send us feedback. Learn more at GreenEnergyFutures.ca. For Green Energy Futures, I'm David Dodge.